The most drastic move came from Putin. Putin, who assassinated his arch-enemy Prigozhin, has confused everything. When the veil of mystery over this assassination was lifted, a lot of things changed in an instant. The move of the assassination squad commissioned by Prigozhin against Gerasimov caused a great panic in the Kremlin. After all, the parallel structure, the foundation of which was laid by Wagner in the army, has once again shown itself. And this time, the signal for change came so clearly for the first time in Moscow. The real surprise was the fate of Prigozhin. The steps taken by Russia against the Ukrainian army in the last days of the Ukrainian war have opened the door to a very difficult process. After the unsuccessful struggle against the Ukrainian army, people in the important ranks of the army, such as Prigozhin, began to take certain steps against Putin. The most important of these certain steps was Prigozhin's march to Moscow against Putin. Lukashenko, who has mobilized to change this process and create peace within the Russian army again, has taken a pretty big step, but that wasn't enough to fix things. One of the most important reasons for Prigozhin's renunciation of the coup was the necessity of unity against the Ukrainian army. After this process, when it became clear that each of the promises Putin made to the Wagner troops was just to pass the process, the Wagner troops began to give quite a big reaction. These reactions prepared the ground for the Wagner soldiers, who expressed their loyalty to Prigozhin, to be able to attempt a coup in any field. However, Prigozhin's moves have also shown themselves one by one. Seeing that the promises made at this point were not kept, Prigozhin and his supporters began preparing for a new coup. But the results of this coup preparation had the quality to change everything. The reason why the army also supported Prigozhin in the same way was that Putin had started a very big liquidation process, especially after the coup. The possibility that Putin could take many steps to complicate things further in the continuation of this purge has changed everything. And when Putin drew upon the reaction of the Russian military, he faced a very critical threshold. While Prigozhin was in exile, he continued to actively negotiate with Lukashenko. In the continuation of this process, things started to get complicated as a result of Prigozhin's request for some concessions. Prigozhin demanded the creation of some Wagner-owned properties in this region. In addition, he also stated that they could serve Lukashenko together with the weapons training in those regions. This was quite an opportunity for Lukashenko, who wanted to protect the regime. Because Putin had the power to disrupt the regime at any moment. However, Lukashenko soon began to attract Putin's attention. While showing the communication problem between these two, it prepared the ground for a different problem to show itself decently. While it is known that the phone conversation between Putin and Lukashenko was quite heated, it is expected that such breakthroughs will cause bigger problems every day. But at this point, when it became clear why Prigozhin was on his way to Moscow, everything changed in an instant, and he faced the most difficult period of Putin's career. After Wagner was actually disbanded, Putin began detailed searches and investigations at many headquarters belonging to Wagner. As a result of these investigations, although some heavy weapons and vehicles were obtained, approximately 10% of the actual requested materials and equipment were recovered. This revealed that Wagner actually had as much weapons power as before and was laying the foundation for a whole new order in Russia. After all, Prigozhin's plan had a big impact all over the world. Prigozhin decided to feed primarily from the tension in the Russian army. Knowing that most Russian generals do not like Valery Gerasimov, Prigozhin made a new move on this issue, and his generals gradually began to organize. At Gerasimov's last meeting, when the defiant attitude of the generals drew attention, a new investigation was conducted by Putin, and the information that Gerasimov will be assassinated in the near future has been intercepted. But there was much more than that in the detailed research written in the report. Prigozhin would simultaneously establish a great dominance in the Russian army and manage to completely overthrow the Russian government. This has prepared the ground for a very big problem, because according to one of the sources on the Rostov-Moscow line, Surovikin, who had been missing for 2 months, had been revealed again. This actually revealed Prigozhin's nefarious plan to Putin, and it has become a matter of time before a coup appears in Russia again. Prigozhin was to organize the Wagner soldiers, who were primarily among the Russian people. As a precaution, Putin wanted to mobilize the Russian army on the night of Prigozhin's arrival in Moscow. But the result did not turn out the way he wanted. Many of the Russian generals had disappeared, and he expected the overthrow of Putin's power after the coup. Putin, whose hands were tied, did not know what to do. So Prigozhin's arrival was planned from the very beginning. Putin, who also failed to receive support from the Russian army acting in accordance with this plan, made a very critical move. And he made one of the biggest mistakes to cut off the wind of change. Putin shot down the plane, which was coming towards Moscow, and was allegedly carrying Prigozhin. This assassination was actually a simple assassination that he carried out against any name that might appear as an alternative to him in Russia. Very similar to this happened to Alexei Navalny in exactly the same way. But Prigozhin was a very lucky leader against Putin. Because he had planned this earlier, he prepared the ground for the army to accept Sergei Surovikin as a general. In an instant, everything has changed, and the research in the Russian army was faced with a rather critical information. The only information that Prigozhin had a plane crash was the disclosure of the passenger list. No such item was found here on the seat reserved for Yevgeny Prigozhin. In the same way, due to the fact that the number of people who saw him get on the plane was quite small, it began to be predicted that Prigozhin was not dead and would return soon. Exactly at this point, the explanations that emerged shocked the whole world. When all the documents stating that Prigozhin had not been assassinated were suddenly revealed, the mood of panic began to persist in Russia. This, in turn, began to lay the foundation for many tensions in the Russian military. In any case, the people who have not had the slightest confidence in Putin, the possibility of a change of administration has reappeared in a short time. This would cause Putin to completely lose both his most loyal ally and the military that ensures the country's security. And in an instant, everything changed. Rumors spread everywhere that some members of the army, who learned that Prigozhin had not been assassinated, were celebrating among themselves. This once again showed how big the problem really is. However, it has once again shown how sharply the balances have changed in the Russian army. However, the fact that some generals wanted to declare Prigozhin president directly was again a few of the details that manifested themselves in the army. But the comments he made to the war analysts on this issue stunned the whole world. According to war analysts, the Russian army is expected to complicate things in a short time by continuing to bring many troubles with it. However, the struggle of the Russian army, which will not be able to form a complete union against the Ukrainian army, both its own internal confusion and external confusion, would confuse things in every field. This was the basis for the entry of the Russian army into a rather difficult process. But exactly at this point, Putin's weakness and inability to show himself sufficiently in the administration is preparing the ground for the start of an even more problematic process in Russia. This will lead to the dissolution of Putin's entire army, especially the Russian army, and a change in the administration in Russia.